start with our session, Old Testament survey. So as announced, we're in the Patriarchs. This is the fourth lesson in the Patriarchs, and it's Jacob number 1. So that means the fifth lesson will be Jacob number 2, as you can see. So we have the four patriarchs. These the last 48 chapters of Genesis are occupied with the lives of these four men. So we've covered Abraham and Isaac, and today it will be Jacob will be our focus. And there is overlap. If you notice the chapter numbers beside each name, you see that they're not entirely separate in their history, but that's the thing about them. Now, I want to note, this is in the notes as well, we're going to talk about, first of all, the years in Isaac's tent, so for Jacob as he grows up. Start with that timeline we had last week. And I discovered I made a mistake in that timeline, a slight mistake, as we were trying to figure out how old Isaac was when, one of the divisions, when Isaac stole the birthright or the blessing, and when that happened. And I had a guess number down, but actually it was much further along the road than I thought. So in my Bible reading, I just finished Genesis for January, moving now into Exodus, and I found the spot where it tells you, and not all the dates are certain in this timeline, but most of them are. So we're going to work through this and sort of help you see the life of Jacob from the beginning until he has his first 11 sons. Okay, so we start with the death of Abraham, and Isaac is 75, Abraham is 175. And prior to that is the birth of Isaac, or Esau and Jacob. Okay, so that's about 15 years. Isaac was 60 years old, the Bible tells us, when Esau and Jacob were born. And we read that passage last week, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But you recall the names. Esau means shaggy or hairy, because he came out all covered in red hair, apparently. And Jacob means supplanter. We're going to start to find out what that means today. And now we find an interesting, this is a little correction in the understanding. So we have this. Esau marries. If you'll turn to, if you've got your Bibles, Genesis 26 and verse 34. Okay, so it's right at the end of the chapter. And it says, when Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. And they brought grief to Isaac and Rebekah, it says. Okay, so speaking about marriage, our young people, they need to listen to what their parents say. That doesn't mean the parents are always right, but parents do have wisdom. All right. Now, so this helps us with our timeline. Esau is 40 years old when he marries this woman. And there are events that happen before this, and there are events that happen after this, which we didn't quite understand. Oh, I have the verse there for you. They brought grief to Isaac and Rebekah. So that's when they're 40 years old. But if you look back in your Bible to Genesis 25, verse 27 to 34, that is where Jacob steals the birthright. It's not the same thing as the blessing. But this occurs before either of them are married. Maybe if Esau had been married, his wives would have told him to smarten up. Wouldn't have let him do this. And Jacob wouldn't have gotten away with it. But anyway, beginning in verse 27 of chapter 25, it says, when the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field. But Jacob was a peaceful man living in tents. Now Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. When Jacob had cooked stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. And Esau said to Jacob, please let me have a swallow of that red stuff there, for I am famished. Therefore his name was called Edom. So Edom means red. Now he was red-haired, and so it sort of fits with his name, but here is this red stuff And people speculate it was red lentils that he was after or something. But anyway, Jacob said, "First sell me your birthright." Esau said, "Behold, I am about to die, so of what use then is the birthright to me?" And Jacob said, "First swear to me." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went on his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Now, Jacob was a man looking for the main chance. He is a supplanter, is what his name means. Remember the baby was reaching out and grasping the heel of Esau as he came out, and so they gave him this name almost as a nickname. But it's he's trying to get the other brother's place. He's a supplanter, okay? Well, here they are. They've grown up. They're adults now, young men. And Esau comes in. He's really hungry, and he's asking for some food. And Jacob has food, and he says, "Well, sell me your birthright." Now, the passage shows you how little thought and little value Esau gave to this thing. The birthright in the culture of the ancient world meant a double portion of the inheritance. So if you've got two sons, one guy gets 2/3, the other guy gets 1/3. That's basically the way it would work. If you have 10 sons, the first guy gets 2 shares, the other guys get, what would that be? 1/11, I guess, right? Okay, so that's how it would work. Okay, so that's the birthright. Now this is not the same thing as the blessing. When Jacob's going to get that too by deception. We talked about that last time because that's part of the story of Isaac. But here is the birthright. Now I want you to note again, this happens before they're 40 years old. We don't know exactly when, but sometime before this happened. We also want to note again the favoritism and the rivalry between the two boys. So the mom and dad, mom favors Jacob, Isaac favors Esau. That's never good either. I mean, I don't, I always would tell, like for example, Susan, I'd say, "You're my favorite older daughter." That's what I say. Because, how can you compare between the two daughters? I mean, they're both lovely, and I love them all. And so you don't want to have a favorite. You want to love from the heart all of your kids. Okay, so, all right, so let's see, what else do I need to say about that? I think we're done with the birthright. Rob?
This is outside of this topic, but it talks to your morning message, as you introduced this by saying about marriage. So basically, for those who don't realize it, the problem with this marriage scenario is that they married outside of Abraham's lineage, which they weren't supposed to do.
Right.
So it's the equivalent of Christians marrying non-Christians. It's the belief.
Well, and that's a good point to bring up. Okay, so let's talk about Esau's marriage. He married the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and Beeri, and so you got polygamy for one thing. Okay, they should have known better. Okay, but they didn't know better, apparently. And but the fact is, these are Canaanites. Now they are living amongst the Canaanites, and remember, Abraham sent his servant to go get a wife for him from his family relatives in Haran. And Esau, again, he is not one who is putting a great, he's not valuing the traditions of his fathers. So he sold the birthright, and then later on he marries women who are clearly not part of the same culture, the same value system as the Abrahamic line. So that is a problem, and that's a good thing to point out. All right?
They're worshiping false gods too.
Right. Yes, they would be. They'd be worshiping. I don't know what the Hittite religion. They might know that. I don't know. I didn't go in depth in the commentaries on this, but you might find that if you're reading about this passage, you might find actually references to what kind of religion the Hittites had. It certainly wasn't the worship of Yahweh God, the holy God of Israel. All right. So let's move on here on our timeline. We're going to get to the blessing here, but I've got to work our way back a little bit to get our chronology correct. We know when Isaac died, okay? Jacob is 120 years old when Isaac died. All right, and we also mentioned, and that would make let's see. Isaac died, Jacob was 120. So both Isaac and Esau. So Esau is basically going to fade out of the Bible story after this point. Jacob and Esau buried Isaac, but after that, there's a mention in the Bible story about Esau's descendants, and he just basically fades out. We don't really hear about him again, other than a few references. Now, we know when Jacob entered Egypt. That is stated for us. Genesis 47, verse 9. And I'll just read that passage that says, I got to get there. Okay, 47, verse 9. And he says, so Jacob said to Pharaoh, the years of my sojourning are 130. So this is when Jacob comes into Egypt. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life, he says. He's very positive. Nor have they attained the years that my fathers lived during the days of their sojourning. So he's going to live on another 15 years after this, or something like that. But this is when Jacob comes to Egypt. This is helping us with our timeline, because at this point, when Jacob is 130, this is year 2 of the lean years. And if you read through the scriptures, not sure if I put the reference there, but it is there. We'll work on the numbers of that next time. Okay, so Joseph is 39 or 40 years old, somewhere in there. Okay, at this point, and the reason we can calculate that out is we have a date for when, or a mention of when Joseph is 30, when he comes into Pharaoh's attention and is elevated to his position in Egypt. He's 30 years old. Okay, so you got 30 years. You got 7 years, 7 good years, plus 2 bad years equals 39. Okay, and I'm going to give an allowance for, the 40 is the number of testing. So I'm just wondering if somehow in the calculations he might be 40. That's why I put that down there. But anyway, go back a few years. That means Jacob is 90 when Joseph is born. Now, what do you think about that? Do you think about Jacob going off to his relatives, to Laban, his uncle, and he's, there's this big romantic story with him and Rachel and Leah and all the whole bit and all these children, and we think of typically Sunday school presentations of this. They'll have a portrait of Jacob as a young man in his 20s or 30s. He was 90 years old when Joseph was born. He was not a young man. Okay, it's just I was trying to figure this out. I said, that does not fit with my picture in my head. Okay, does not at all. Anyhow, but this is what we have. I mean, it's the only way it can be. So, all right. So now the blessings. So we talked about that last time, but I just want to touch on it again. So this is Genesis 27, and I'm just going to read the blessing for Jacob, not for Esau, because we're focusing on Jacob today. So Genesis 27, verses 27 to 29. So he came close and kissed him. When he smelled the smell of his garments, he blessed him and said, see, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field, which the Lord has blessed. Now may God give you the dew of heaven, and of the fatness of the earth, and an abundance of grain, and new wine. May people serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be master of your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you. So this is the blessing of the Father. This is, of course, in a sense, we get some of this language comes from the Abrahamic covenant, but get my name straight. Isaac is blessing his son Jacob, but he's thinking it's Esau. Remember that? Okay. Now, notice the date or the age I put there. I put 100 plus and 40 plus for Jacob and Isaac when this happened. Where do I get that number? It comes right after, this chapter comes right after when Esau was 40 years old and he married these Canaanite women. Okay? Now, the blessing chapter is the next thing. How old were they? We don't get a time marker. So I put 40 plus. I don't know how old. Okay? He's older than 40 anyway. Jacob is. When he steals the blessing. All right, and then we have Isaac's prophetic statement later in the chapter. He says, yes, and he will be blessed. And I made the point, Jacob got the blessing by fraud. Okay, now, I don't believe, the Bible doesn't say, but I don't believe that Isaac was obliged to leave the blessing on Jacob. Okay, but as a prophet, Isaac understood this was God's will. He understood a distinction between the character of his two sons, neither of whom are stellar, right? Jacob is a conniving supplanter. He's looking out for number one. He is looking to get the advantage. So, but he does value the birthright and the blessing, whereas Esau doesn't. Gordon.
If Jacob and his mother didn't steal the blessing,
Right.
if he got the blessing anyway.
Well, I think he would have.
Yeah, like I'm thinking.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Yeah. It's,
Yeah.
We,
And see, this is, and that's faith, right?
interrupt God.
Yeah, we want to run ahead of God.
Yeah.
That's right. That's a good point. See, Jacob, Jacob is the one God chose. And we're going to see that later on in his life. In fact, in the next event, we're going to see that. But Jacob had to run ahead of God. He had to get it by crook instead of hook, right? he had to, and so it's an interesting thing. Now, what we see in Jacob's life, we're only got partway through today, but what we see is a total transformation. Here's Jacob, the supplanter. Finally, God says to him, your name isn't going to be Jacob anymore. It's going to be Israel. What does Israel mean? Prince with God. Okay, his relationship to God changes, and so that gives us some hope. Now, like you probably look back in your life and say, "Man, I should never have done whatever." There's something in your life. We're not going to take a survey, but I bet you there's something in your life you say, "I should have never done that." Right? Okay. Yes, Rob.
I'm sort of trying to figure this out. I'm sure I'm missing something. So we have here the blessing when Jacob is 40 years old by Isaac.
40 plus. Yes.
40 plus. And then at 90 is when he goes to Haran.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes,
okay.
We're coming to that.
Okay, because what I'm seeing, I'm trying to figure this out because in chapter 27 of Genesis is the blessing part.
Yes.
But then all of a sudden,
Chapter 28, he's on the road.
Shift, right?
That's right.
But in
That's
essence,
right. Because we see, for us, the time is compressed in the Bible, so we're going to come up to this. Okay, but the thing that I want to say here, though, is, okay, so we've got all these problems in our lives, and we look back and say, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. But here's the thing: God's grace can help us overcome every one of those things you should never have done.
Amen.
Okay, and the memories might come back, and you just have to say, that's under the blood. I'm going to trust God, and He's working it out, and I'm walking with Him. That's the way we do it. Okay?
And that's your morning message. That's a continuation of
Yeah.
that the Lord has mercy to mess up.
That's right. He does, and we have. And it's not like, and I would say, there's not one person who has lived a pure life other than Jesus, right?
Yeah.
So we're not trying to, when we preach these things, we're not trying to say, okay, you sinners out there, you need to straighten up. Every one of us got things in the past, right? Every one of us. Okay. All right. So that's the years in the tent of Isaac. Now, the years with Laban we're going to talk about next. So when does this happen? So I've got Jacob's sojourn with Laban is 20 years. Okay. Now, the chronology, 14 years for the wives. Okay. This is his wages. First 7 years, he's supposed to get Rachel, he gets Leah. Oh, so sorry, we marry the first daughter off first. And so we can't, but you can have her, Laban says, but you'll have to work another 7 years. So he gets 7 years out of him, and he gets rid of 2 daughters. I'm not sure if maybe I shouldn't say gets rid of, but at least he marries them off. Okay? Now, then he has 6 years for the flocks. And we will, I'm not going to look into the details of this, but if you know the story, maybe I'll just tell the story. So Laban comes to him and says, all right, you've worked the 7 years, you paid off, I don't know how I said it. You paid off Rachel. Okay, so you've worked off the 7 years. Okay. So he says, what are you going to, I need to still pay you. What do you want? What are your wages? So Joseph says, all right, he says, Jacob says, I will work and my wages will be the odd colored sheep and goats. Okay? So you keep all the pure, like if they're pure black, they're yours. If they're pure white, they're yours. But all the ones that have patches on them, that have stripes, that have, their coats are different, then those are mine. And then the story, there's a lot of complicated things. But basically what happens is Laban's flocks tend to produce striped and patched animals from that point on. And they all go to Jacob. Okay? And I'm sure every time they do, I don't know how they did it. Like in the Western books I used to read, they had the big roundup and they find out whose cattle was whose. If they had the roundup, and then Laban's going, wait a minute, how come I don't have enough sheep here? How come you're getting them all? But anyway, that's how it worked out. They ended up, so Jacob labored for 6 years for the flock. So that's 20 years total. Okay, now, another point in the timeline, Jacob is 6 years old when Joseph is 6 years old when Jacob leaves. So we've got the birth of Joseph at age 90. That's 14 years, at least 14 years into the time with Laban. Because after Joseph is born is when Laban comes and says, okay, what's your new wages going to be? Okay, does that make sense? I'm not sure if I'm saying that very well, but I want to make sure I've made sense. Anybody say, what in the world is he talking about?
I actually get it because I used to think it was just 14 years, so I understand what you're saying.
Right. So there's 20 years all told. But and his first 7 years, he's single. The second 7 years, he's married to both of them. Okay, so the way it worked was, he makes this deal. You can, the Bible is funny the way it says it. They have the big ceremony that he's worked it off for Rachel. And they have the big ceremony, and the woman, of course, is veiled, and it's a nighttime ceremony, and they go off to their tent, and he walks. The end of the verse, it says, they got up in the morning, and behold, it was Leah. And it's like total shock. Like, what? What are you doing here? And so Jacob, of course, getting all my J's messed up. Jacob goes and says, what in the world? And he says, and he explains this thing. The older has to be married first, so that just stands to reason. But I'll let you, have Rachel too. And the thing is, another thing we don't realize often when we're reading the story is he was married to Rachel 1 week later. Okay? She had a mortgage on her. Okay? The mortgage was another 7 years. Okay? That's how it works. Okay? So the two women are both his wives, and then we start having this competition about children. And by the way, let's see, what do I want parts of this do I want to read? I've just been telling the story. I have the years with Laban. Rebekah and Isaac send Jacob away. We do need to read Jacob meeting with God at Bethel. So it's somewhere, I guess Jacob must be 70 years old when he meets with God at Bethel. We do need to read that one. That is Genesis 28, and verse 10 is where it starts. Then Jacob departed from Beersheba and went toward Haran. He came to a certain place and spent the night there because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of the place and put it under his head and lay down in that place. He had a dream, and behold, a ladder was set on the earth with its top reaching to heaven. And behold, the angels of the Lord were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, now this is significant. This is why I wanted to read this. I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will also be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and the south. And in you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Now that's everything that's in the Abrahamic covenant. That's very important. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Now, the critical thing here to note, by the way, I said he was 70. That's not quite right. He would have been 74 or 76. 90 minus 14. Okay, he's about 76 when this happens. But what God is saying, he's stolen the blessing from Esau. But God is in, this is some years later. So there's a gap between chapter 28 and chapter 27. But God is the one who is now conferring on Jacob the Abrahamic covenant. This is extremely significant. So you look at what Jacob did beforehand. That was through conniving and through making bargains. Here, this is God's sovereign grace, where he is making the distinction. And he is saying, you are the one whom I've chosen. And it is simply based on God's own declaration. Jacob is the one who's chosen. So as he's heading towards Haran, where Laban is, and the rest of his relatives, he is chosen by God. That's extremely important. The rest of the chapter, Jacob vows to serve God. So verse 18, so Jacob rose early in the morning, took the stone that he put under his head, set it up as a pillar, poured oil on its top. He called the name of that place Bethel. That means house of God. Okay. However, previously the name of the city had been Luz, which I don't remember what that means. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me on this journey that I take, and will give me food to eat and garments to wear, and I return to my father's house in safety, then the Lord will be my God. Now, okay, so God has just made the sovereign choice. Now we'll listen to the language of Jacob. He makes a vow, a conditional vow. Okay, God, if you mean what you said, then I'll serve you.
Meanwhile, he marries two women.
Meanwhile, he marries two women. That's right. Okay, but you see, God made the promise, and he's saying, okay, that sounds good, and I'll worship you, but I want you to guarantee that you bring me back. That's Jacob. He's always doing deals. Okay, before the art of the deal. Now, that's not a political statement. You catch what I just said. Okay, Rob.
Well, it's so curious because this all speaks to God's sovereignty over everything.
Yes.
Right? And it's like, despite Jacob's
Yeah.
usurping the birthright, but yet God has a sovereign plan. And so, to me, I look in the world today with all the problems and wars and international things. Yeah. Well, God's working his will out.
That's right.
Things, right.
Yeah, we look at all the problems in the world, and it's scary. Like some of you have family members that are in very dangerous places, right? We know that. But out at the end, God will protect his people. And sometimes the protection means we'll die and go to heaven. We don't like to think about that. But God will take care of us. We have to trust him. We can't compromise. All right, so Jacob's vow. Then Jacob meets Rachel. The next chapter, this is very romantic. So he comes up and he comes to the place, and there he comes to this well. And the people say, oh, well, we all wait till the time. But here's Laban's daughter Rachel coming. And we'll start in verse 4 of chapter 29. Jacob said to them, my brothers, where are you from? And they said, we are from Haran. He said to them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? They said, we know him. And they said, is it well with him? And they said, it is well. And here is Rachel, his daughter, coming with the sheep. He said, behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered. Water the sheep and go pasture them. But they said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered. And they roll the stone from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. When Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob went up and rolled the stone from the mouth of the well and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted his voice and wept. Okay, and so then he identifies himself and you know the whole story. Now, and he is impressed with her. Now, she's probably quite a bit younger than him. Both Leah and Rachel are probably quite a bit younger than him. But he is impressed with her, and he's doing the manly thing to roll the stone away and to impress her with his strength. All right, I guess, or something. And they water the sheep. He meets Laban, makes a bargain. This is where he bargains for Rachel. I'm not going to read that passage, verses 13 to 20. And for 7 years. And then the next step, down in verse 21, Laban, I put in my notes, out Jacob's Jacob. Okay? So that is verse 21. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, for my time is completed, that I may go into her." Laban gathered all the men of the place, made a feast. Now in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to him, and Jacob went into her. Laban also gave his maid Zilpah and his daughter Leah as a maid. So it came about in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. That's the passage I was talking about earlier. And he said to Laban, "What is this you have done? Was it not for Rachel that I have served you? Why then have you deceived me?" But Laban said, "It is not the practice in our place to marry off the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also for the service which you will serve with me for another 7 years." Okay? So, what a deal. And so that's why I say Laban out Jacob's Jacob. So he meets his match, and he is supplanted. And then finally, the final bargain is he works 6 more years. And at the end of the 6 more years, he has 11 sons. And the reason I say that is because when Joseph was born, that 6 more years deal began. Okay? So, we're going to just move on now and talk about these sons. Okay, Jacob sojourned with Laban and the sons. Okay, Rebekah and Isaac. Okay, let's see, where am I? Oh, I put all these notes in here. I've just ran through all this, and you've seen me reading these passages. So let's get to the sons, Jacob's sons. Okay, first of all, the sons of Leah. Now, it seems like these girls were having babies, Leah was, one right after another in this relationship. So Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, the first 4 sons. Rachel has no sons. The first name, Reuben, means see, a son. So she's very happy. She's given her husband a son. That's a great blessing in that culture to have a son, a firstborn. Then Simeon, hearkening, or God hears. Okay? Then Levi, join. Surely my husband will be joined to me. Judah, praise. He's full of praise for what God has done for her. Then it says that Rachel conceives a plan. We're not going to go and read all these passages, but Rachel has not had children. Her sister Leah has 4. Judah's a little baby. And she says, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to give you my maid as a wife. Now, we look at this and we say, this is totally bizarre, but it's the same thing that happened with Abraham. When Abraham and Sarah did not have children, and Sarah says, well, maybe if I give you my maid as a wife, then she can bear a child and on my knees, that was the custom, and he can be your son. All right? So the same thing's repeated here. So Rachel gives Bilhah to Jacob, and she has 2 sons, Dan, which means judgment. God has judged for me, she's saying. And Naphtali, my wrestling. She's talking about her struggle with her sister. So Leah is not to be outdone. So she gives her maid also to Jacob. All right? Which is, like none of these moves. Okay, this is all. You think about the book of Ecclesiastes where Solomon says the things that are done under the sun. This is all under the sun. They are thinking about God in a way because God is hearing me, I'm wrestling and I'm getting a judgment and so forth. But they are thinking on a very earthly level here. And so they're making decisions. We'd have to say they're ungodly decisions, right? The way this family is developing. However, again, in the providence and sovereignty of God, each one of these sons is going to become a tribe in Israel. Okay? God has made a determination. Jacob's family is going to be the family of blessing. And even though we're going to read about Judah later, and he's not a nice guy at the start. You see? So there's a lot of problems in this family, but God is still going to use this family. That's his determination. All right, so Zilpah has 2 sons. Gad, a troop comes. Leah, she names him. Or fortune, it means. And then Asher, which means happy. I'm so happy about this. And then Leah has 2 more sons in the meantime. So all of this is going on. And there was a brief period where Leah left off bearing, but then she has 2 more sons. Issachar, a reward, and Zebulun, a dwelling. Okay? So, those are those 2 sons. And then, finally, after the whole process, Rachel has a son, Joseph. And it means adding or let him add. Okay, I'm adding to the total, and she feels vindicated. Now, she also is the mother of Benjamin, the 12th son, but this is after the return to the land. She does not have the baby during those 20 years. Joseph is at least 6 years old before Benjamin is born, probably even older than that. Okay, so 11 sons in 7 years is what the record shows us. Okay, any questions or comments on the life of Jacob so far? Yes, that's right. So Leah first she left off bearing. She had four sons. Then she had a period where she wasn't having any children. And so then there's this business with the maids. And then Leah begins to have children again. And there's also a daughter who's mentioned in there. And I think she's born during this time as well. But it's not mentioned in this list. So there's a lot of kids. All right. Any other yes, Efwa.
Looking at the whole picture, you can see that it's a family. You know, every family has its traits.
That's right.
All my family.
Yeah.
When you mention my name, yes, some are greedy, some like money.
Yes.
But I think this is a family of, how do you call it? They are tricksters, eh?
Yeah.
They are deceivers. That is the family trait.
That's
because
right.
You can see the mother Rachel.
Yeah.
Had that quality in her.
Yeah.
That's why she was able to lure his son to go and wear the brother's clothes.
That's right. Yeah.
And then I keep asking, what did Jacob knew that the brother didn't know? Because it's a very spiritual statement for you to say, sell me first your birthright.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these are things people don't usually. Mm-hmm. It is very uncommon for someone to say, sell me first your birthright, unless you're a spiritual person.
Yeah.
And you know something.
Right. Okay, so I would say, so she's valuing the birthright. Jacob values the birthright, right? And the blessing. He values those. Okay, now, the way he does it is not good. The way he got them was not good. But here's the thing that what you're hinting at is there must be something spiritual in him because he did value those things. I would say that's right. Okay, so Jacob there is something, he has a God consciousness, but he wants God on his own terms. And I will say, like he says to God, okay, you bring me back. I'm going to, he has this dream. God makes a promise. He says, all right, he says, if you bring me back safely to my father's house, you will be my God. Okay, and God says, okay. So he has this consciousness, but he's not wholehearted. And then when he's coming back, we'll get to that next time, but there's that wrestling with the angel of the Lord, okay, with the appearance of the Lord. And he's wrestling to, and striving with God, and he insists that God not let him go he won't let him go until God blesses him. And so the thing is, despite all of his machinations and deceptions, Jacob did value God. All right, Tola.
Yes. God is our creator.
Mm-hmm.
He created everybody.
Yeah.
He even said, before I formed thee, I know thee.
Yeah.
God knows Esau
Mm-hmm.
and God knows Jacob.
Yes.
When the mother wants to give birth, we read that Jacob was holding the
Right.
leg of the. God has predestined all these things.
That's right.
That Esau will be like that. And God knew Esau,
Yes.
that he doesn't value anything.
Yes.
That maybe he
Yeah.
prefer food
Yes.
than spiritual things.
That's right.
But Jacob, like the Bible stated it, that he was calm and gentle in the yard. But Esau was a wild man.
That's right.
Yeah, that lives
That's right.
with animals.
Yes.
So maybe God knew that
Yes.
before they were coming in. So it's something that we cannot really say this is what
Right.
actually happened.
Right. Well, we can't know everything about these men, and God, of course, does know everything about them, and He clearly chose Jacob. Now, what we're saying is Jacob is an imperfect person. So there's a couple of things that we can learn from this. Number one, there is hope for us, because none of us are perfect persons. Number two is that there is a progress in spiritual life. We get towards the end. Jacob, he's had all these experiences. He has the loss of Joseph coming up. He has all these things happen to him. And he finally does come to trust God. And you look at the last two chapters of Genesis, and where he gives the prophecies about his sons and his grandsons. And he is totally trusting God at that point. Okay, so his life has changed. And so that does give us hope. So I think that for us, we look at these examples, we don't admire everything they did. And it's interesting that the Bible doesn't portray them as perfect people. Because you read ancient literature about, some king or whatever, and they hardly ever talk about the bad things that happened. Like very rarely, or they gloss it over. And Rob and I and our family, when our son Rory got married, after the wedding, we went to the British Museum. And one of the things we saw was this wall relief. It was taken from the palace of Sennacherib, the king of the Assyrians. And this wall relief, all it is carved stone at this point. It would have been painted and brightly decorated when it was in his palace. But it is a portrayal of the sack of Lachish, which is one of the cities of Judah. And you see all these warriors marching in on this relief. You see the king sitting in his throne observing the battle and all the impressive victory and the slaves being taken away. And so he had that decorating his walls. Okay. Now that battle happened a couple of months before the siege of Jerusalem. And in the siege of Jerusalem, Hezekiah prayed, and that's the one where 185,000 Assyrian soldiers woke up dead. Okay, God struck down his army overnight. And Sennacherib went back to his land and didn't dare come back to Jerusalem. Now, what does Sennacherib put on his wall? Does he put on the defeat of Jerusalem? No. He puts on the victory in Lachish, right? And that's what they do. But the Bible doesn't work that way. It tells us what these guys are like. They're not infallible heroes. They are people who are struggling in their relationship with God, just like us. And they grow, and we do see Jacob grow. So that is one thing to take away. All right, any last questions before we close? Yes, brother.
Jacob bought the birthright. Did he never receive anything?
Well, yeah, it doesn't really emphasize that at the end. By the time that when Jacob comes back after the 20 years with Laban, Isaac's still alive. And then Esau and Jacob, Jacob makes a big present that he gives to Esau. Esau says, "Oh, I have enough." And Jacob says, "No, you take it." And they sort of bury the hatchet, not in each other's back, but they get themselves, they restore their relationship with one another. And but some years later, I forget exactly how old, what my timeline said, but anyway, Isaac finally dies after Jacob has come back, and it seems that both Esau and Jacob are fairly wealthy. So it doesn't really matter, and the Bible doesn't tell us how big of an inheritance Isaac left to Jacob. But one would presume that if he followed the custom and followed the deal, then he would get the 2/3 and Esau would get the 1/3.
Well, and ultimately, all the land goes through Jacob's descendants with the 12 tribes. So
Right.
providentially, through that lineage,
Right.
he does get his blessing in a way.
Well, I mean, God, the part that's important, okay, is the part that God gives. Really, in the end, the blessing and the birthright don't matter. Really doesn't matter. It's the one God chooses to give the covenant to. That's the part that matters. And that's totally by grace. Esau or Jacob didn't get that by bargaining. God just said, okay, I'm going to give that to you. Okay. So it's interesting. It's so interesting to think about all this stuff. But that's where we're at. So we'll talk more about Jacob next time. I'm not sure if I finished in the middle of his life, but we will carry on and talk about some of the things that happened in the meantime. And then we'll start with Joseph and finish up Genesis. Maybe in a couple of weeks. We'll see. All right. Okay, let's pray. Our Father, we thank you for this time that we've had together today discussing the life of Jacob and the things that he's gone through. And we do thank you that you are a great God and a gracious God in spite of our failures and our faults, that you do receive us, that you do guide us, and you help us to walk close to you. Help us each one to be committed to that walk. In Jesus' name, amen.